This video is about the social economy, better known as the Sustainable Agenda, within Ontario, Canada. Cochrane to be a innovative sustainability hub following the signing of a tripartite agreement. Frank Louvel, the Cochrane Board of Trade, that's the man in the blue shirt over here to the far left. And then we have Mark Keeley of KPGI. I was not able to find a website for KPGI, nor was I able to find out what the acronym actually stood for. I've just found vague things depicting it as a Toronto development firm, so therefore I presume that they have large sway over the infrastructure and public policy. To what extent municipalities, provinces, countries, I don't know. And we have Chief Keith Matthew of the Indigenous Critical Infrastructure Fund attending virtually via that tablet, which is being held by Jason Mashad. And I'm going to talk about those three eventually, but first little bits of this article. 2 years ago, the town of Cochrane was presented with a proposal that suggested that the community could become a sustainable model for power and food production. Well, we all know what sustainable means in these people's eyes, limiting food and water for us. And as well, a little fun fact about Cochrane is in, I believe, 1916, there was a Rothschild for a mayor. Interesting company they have in the way of politics. On Friday, March 4th, this proposal took the next step on the road to reality with the special signing ceremony to develop a sustainability hub to be located in Cochrane. So Mark Keeley refers to this as extraordinary and a historical event, which tells me he is evidently on the wrong side of history. And we will go over his background a little bit, but first I just want to show you this photo because I think that says enough about the kind of company he keeps and who he actually is. According to their press release, the project includes the development of a facility to mine cryptocurrency or blockchain. Blockchain technology uses a decentralized distribution system organized through a network of nodes. Blockchain is a direct and transparent ecosystem between miners, exchanges, and the blockchain itself. The facility will house many rigs that will store data across a network, thereby eliminating most issues and risks that centralized systems have, making it function resiliently and hard to manipulate and allow few vulnerabilities. With an exceptional climate and a smart workforce, the development of this campus aspires to make Cochrane the blockchain capital of Canada. So the reason why this is alarming to me is because a lot of blockchain-oriented companies always tend to partner with companies involved in the manufacturing of biometric IDs or biometrics of sorts. So all in all, I think that there is most definitely a connection to the blockchain and decentralized ID, and I will cover that further in the video, and I have previously in other videos. So in Mexico, a Canadian Indigenous leader meets with Mexican elected officials. This Indigenous leader is Chief Keith Matthew of the Indigenous Critical Infrastructure Fund, and he said his presence in Mexico was intended to inspire reflection on the collective future and on a new way of doing business between nations. Mr. Matthew told the Mexican MPs that it was necessary to create mechanisms to allow First Nations people to become equal partners in the development of major infrastructure. I know there are ongoing Mexican projects that embody an inclusive vision for Indigenous peoples. The hospital project in Chetumal, developed by a Canadian company led by Ernesto Bays and Mark Keeley of BVE and KNA respectively, companies that are part of my delegation, is just one example. So all in all, it sounds very much like Chief Keith Matthews is on board with this social economy agenda and is pulling people into it, essentially, in particular the Indigenous nations. So with over 20 years of experience in the business of healthcare and advocacy, we have Mark Keeley, who is now a leading voice for transformation in healthcare and drug reform as chief advocate at KNA, or Keeley and Associates Inc., an advocacy and strategy implementation firm in Canada. He's an advisor to several organizations in Canada and international on healthcare and drug reform. So he's an expert in governance, healthcare communications, and business management processes. So the success has been honed for years of experience in politics, business, public policy, as well as governance. And in spring of 2007, Mark was the CEO of the Ontario Pharmacists Association, which is the largest professional organization serving the interests of pharmacists in Canada. So, as well as you noted by his picture with Justin Trudeau, he also served as an advisor to another Liberal Prime Minister, John N. Turner, as well as former Premier of Ontario, David R. Peterson. And then a little bit about Keith Matthew over here. He's a proud member of this particular First Nation, and in the central interior of British Columbia, Canada, he's been working with First Nations communities for most of his adult life. He's a former journalist, worked in corporate Canada, and is a former counselor and chief of his community. He strongly believes in creating businesses and opportunities in training for Indigenous people and helping his people acquire the skills and capital to start their own business enterprises. So this is the Indigenous Critical Infrastructure Fund, and it's apparently for supporting and investing in the immediate infrastructure needs of Indigenous communities. So let's see what they're doing to the infrastructure of Indigenous communities here. So this is the page for the Indigenous Community Infrastructure Fund, and the Government of Canada is investing $4.3 billion over 4 years, starting in 2021 to 2022 for this project. And the ICIF, the Indigenous Community Infrastructure Fund, supports the mandate of Indigenous Services Canada, the ISC, and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, CERNAC, to close the infrastructure gap in Indigenous communities. And the the ISC allocates funding to recipients based on an assessment of needs for shovel-ready projects as determined by Indigenous partners and communities and assessed by regions based on national needs. CERNAC will be working with Indigenous self-government and modern treaty partners, Inuit and Métis Nation communities, and Northern First Nation and Northern Métis communities to collaboratively develop infrastructure action plans specific to partners' needs and circumstances. I think the term action plans is a little bit unique because every municipality, or rather every city, has a climate action plan. They might call it something a little bit different depending on the city you go to, but those are like your municipal Agenda 2030s, essentially. Engagement planning is underway. ISC and CERNAC are working with Indigenous partners and organizations to establish plans for the delivery of critical infrastructure projects in their communities. So we have Jason Mashad, who is the gentleman holding the tablet with the native fellow, and he founded Stardust Technologies in 2014 with the mission to empower the space industry through innovations in technologies, science, with the goal of making space more accessible to humanity. And through this, Jason Mashad has established multiple international innovation projects with universities such as York University and the University of Technology, Sydney. So, as we can see by Stardust here, it also seems like they're normalizing interfacing with AI by the looks of pictures here, and they have different projects probably in that regard that revolve around AI. So all in all, it's a little bit unsettling for me to look at, and he's an interesting choice on that project of 3. And Here we have Dennis Clement, who is the mayor of Cochrane. He says the vision is hub Cochrane, but not just Cochrane, it's the entire north. So, all in all, Cochrane is northeastern Ontario as a region, and then as well there's the small town known as Cochrane, and I believe Kenora is northwestern Ontario as divided by their region. So, all in all, this is a vision for the entire north as he is talking about. The Ontario government is remaining tight-lipped about the progress and rollout of the proposed provincial ID program. And the government has removed reference to the 2022 guideline from the digital ID website. So this is the Ontario government website, and I went on the digital ID section and under the subcategory technology and standards. And here we have a lot of the organizations that they are working with and collaborating with, that sort of a thing. So here I'm going to start off with the DIACC. So this is the Digital Identification and Authentication Council of Canada. This is another biometric ID company, and I'm going to show you several of them. So the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, this is with the DIACC, that's their logo. It's designed to meet current and future Canadian digital identity ecosystem innovation needs by verifying trust of services and networks. So I'm going to scroll right down and show you some of the others that I found here. So I'm going to pull up the Decentralized Identity Foundation right over here. DIF. They're another biometric ID company, and I'm going to spare reading the mandates of every company. I'm just going to show you some of the members and who they partner with. So we have Microsoft, we have Hyperledger, a blockchain-oriented group, and we have Accenture and Nuggets. Those all as well partner with the organization ID 2020, and I'm sure you might recognize some of the organizations, especially Interact, which I've passed. So we as well see that one of their partners is ID 2020. Go figure. So ID 2020, we have its founding partners, Accenture, Gavi, Microsoft. So Accenture and Microsoft are the common ground, and we as well have the Rockefeller Foundation. And then I'm going to look at some of its general partners here. We have the blockchain in the top left corner, Facebook, MasterCard, Simprints, and UNICC, which is the United Nations International Computing Center. Sorry about the stuttering on the acronym. Trust Over IP was another organization listed on the Ontario government website. So I'm going to show you as well. We have Accenture, we have the government of British Columbia, I believe, MasterCard, and then as well underneath some of the contributors here, we're going to end up, we pass the Development Bank, and we as well will be passing the Montreal Economic Institute, MEI, which is where Maxime Bernier used to work for, and the MEI receives its funding from the Atlas Network along with numerous other organizations, including the Justice Center for Constitutional Conventions. It's a whole different story, and Atlas Network is a think tank that funds various other organizations all around the world. So this is the United Nations International Computing Center over here, just to show you. This is one of the various departments within the United Nations, and essentially what happens is the United Nations is where people point the finger toward a lot of the center of this agenda, which, yeah, they are definitely a central point, but I'm just going to expand a little further and say all roads lead to Rome, and you can watch my video with that title for a little bit more information. However, this is not something that's included in that video. The permanent observer mission of the Holy See to the United Nations. The Holy See became a permanent observer state of the United Nations on April 6, 1964, and since then has always been invited to participate in the meetings of all sessions of the General Assembly. So the way it's almost written is like the United Nations and the Vatican are separate entities, and the Vatican in and of itself is a neutral entity. All of these quote-unquote neutral entities are basically either leaders in crises or are funding and operating things going on in the background. And you never hear about their names throughout history, or at least very rarely you do. So I want to expand on the idea of potentially smart cities or different infrastructure in Northern Ontario. However, I was not able to connect any of those three individuals to FedNor, the Federal Economic Development Agency for Northern Ontario. I was not able to find that connection. I'm not saying it's not there, but I'll be doing a second video that talks a bit about FedNor, because FedNor in and of itself is part of the social economy funding, as we can see, and Joanne Meny was involved in that. The funding was provided to three regional development agencies: the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, the Department of Western Economic Diversification, and the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec, as well as to Industry Canada's FedNor initiative. So I'll be expanding a little bit on Joanne Meny's involvement in the social economy, and potentially Maxime Bernier as well. However, I was not able to link FedNor to what I was talking about going on in Cochrane. So, anyway, stay tuned for more. Take care of yourselves, and thanks for watching.